Hi everyone, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to be talking about my experience delivering accessibility at Rare Limited, an Xbox game studio. Before we get started, who am I and why am I talking to you today? I'm Xander Ashwell and I'm the Director of Accessibility and User Experience at Rare Limited. I'm a mid-30s white male with mousy blonde hair and a generally dishevelled appearance. My background is in user experience design for web, mobile and software, and I've been working in the games industry for nearly 7 years now. In my spare time, I can be found mucking about making things from wood and ceramics, and generally being a bit of a hobbit. Okay, so what will I be waffling on about for the next half hour or so? What is this talk actually about? Well, it's about applying a growth mindset with the group of people you work with, moving your accessibility efforts forwards from where they are now. Who is it for? Well, if you make games and want to make them for a wonderfully diverse collection of humans, my hope is, no matter where your studio is on their accessibility journey, you'll find something here that can help you. I'm not going to cover feature or implementation specifics for Sea of Thieves. That's a story for another time. Why does it matter? Well, being intentional is key to progressing. We can move at speed, but without knowing the direction we want to travel, we can end up somewhere we don't want to be. Or worse, further away from where we want to be than when we started. And a caveat, naturally, this is shaped by my own experiences for the context that I operate in. Your context may well be different, the games you make will be different, the path you tread will certainly be different. This is not a blueprint, playbook or diktat, but we can see further when we stand on each other's shoulders, so my hope is that you'll gain more successes than I by learning from my failures and successes. So we've been on a journey with Sea of Thieves, an incredible journey, not just in terms of the development of the game, growth in player base, and scaling out of features, but in terms of accessibility too. The image on screen is an early piece of concept art with the Sea of Thieves logo, contrasted with a more recent scene from the front end of the game, to show just how far we've come. We launched Sea of Thieves in March 2018, and from an accessibility standpoint there was lots of opportunity for growth. We had some accessibility features, but for the most part, these weren't necessarily developed with accessibility in mind. Things like text chat with pre-canned contextual text messages, what we called pirate chat, speech to text and text to speech, and decent but not exhaustive key binding support. There were also inherent aspects to gameplay that were inclusive. The social aspect is supportive of assisted play, and many areas of key feedback were in multiple sensory modes. But much of this wasn't intentionally delivered with accessibility in mind. We had no public-facing communications around how accessible Sea of Thieves was, no clear means of gathering feedback from players with lived experience of disability, and no guides or documentation around what players could expect. Cut to March 2022, 4 years since we first launched Sea of Thieves. 55% of all our updates contain accessibility features. 43 individual features or improvements have been delivered in the last 12 months. All public-faced owned comms channels are WCAG 2.1 compliant. We have a dedicated feedback loop, a dedicated landing page, dedicated support guides. Our developers self-identify areas of improvement, and new features ship with accessibility as a core priority. We have the first accessibility role, that's me. We have our accessibility champs at Rare Network, and we have self-initiated awareness events within the studio. And Can I Play That awarded us Most Improved Game. So how do we get from there to here? I'll let you into a dirty little secret. Don't tell anyone, but we didn't, and still don't, have huge and laborious formalised processes at Rare for delivering accessibility. We do have formalised processes as an Xbox game studio around CVAA compliance, testing and documentation. The Xbox accessibility team have done incredible work in supporting studios, so shout out to Tara, Anna, Anita, Aidan and so many others out there. But within Rare's various gameplays and centralised teams, there are no rigid processes or structures specifically around accessibility. And why is that? Well, I'm hoping that I'll be able to explain this in the coming slides. So here's what I'm attempting to convey. My hypothesis is that team culture is critical to delivering accessibility. If you pretended that this was a zero-sum game and you could only choose one thing to influence between culture and process, my perspective is that culture should be the thing to focus on. When you become aware of the vast gap between where we would like to be as an industry and where we are now, it feels imperative to do something immediately And often that can look like direct action, implementing processes, mandating change. It's not a zero-sum game, of course. You can shift the needle in a team's culture and implement rigorous processes at the same time. But I suggest that initially, focusing your attention on embedding accessibility in team culture earlier gets accessibility where it needs to be in the mindset of a team in a more sustainable, holistic, and autonomous way than enforcing rigid processes from the outset. So where to begin? Well, as a previous colleague of mine shared, there's a really simple trick to employ when you're striving for change. One that's super simple, but often isn't employed at the right time. Let's turn to the end of the book. What does the desired end state look like? Where do we want to be? Working backwards from a desired end state, mapping dependencies as we go, can often shine a light on which choices to make to get to where we'd like to be. So what might the perfect studio delivering accessibility look like? I'm not focusing on the output here. As we all know, there's no checklist for finishing accessibility, but we can describe the state of play that would facilitate consistent quality output. So, if we had everyone feeling empowered to deliver accessibility, our leaders were supportive and encouraging, responsibility was distributed, we had support and guidance from expert sources, we had a common language for standards, and we aspire for excellence, then we might be in a pretty good place, right? What are some of the other qualities that a studio might have? Accessibility would be considered early. We'd have accessibility processes as per any other facet of development. We'd have a priority in prioritization, not as an aside or an afterthought. We'd be collaborating with the disabled community. Accessibility would just be business as usual and not bolt-on or special. Onboarding and mandated training includes accessibility. And if there's anything you feel that I've missed or nuances that I haven't detailed or anything here that you disagree with, feel free to discuss them in the chat. So while I hasten to use acronyms like KPIs or OKRs, if we've established our objective, what might some of the indicators that we're on the right track be? Well, accessibility would be a core priority and would be in scope by default. Development teams would collaborate with the disabled community. Development teams would self-identify issues. Inclusive design would be baked into the core gameplay. We'd have an honest, transparent dialogue with the audience. And we'd be investing in specialist roles. So, how do we do this? How do we get there? Well, let's start by looking at a really simple statement of intent about what we're trying to achieve and figure out how we can get there. Bear with me, because this gets messy pretty fast. So, making games that everyone can play. Seems like a reasonable statement, doesn't it? Making games, that's what we do. That everyone can play, that's inclusive, accessible experiences. And before I go any further, let's just take a moment. What needs to happen to get here? Well, making games needs people who know how to make games. That's developers. And ensuring that everyone can play them, that's the accessibility ingredient in this recipe. So what do developers need to make accessible games? Well, they need to have awareness in the first instance. They need training or other learning modes to know the what, the why and the how. They need to be accountable for the accessibility of a product. And as an aside, that's not accountable in the blame sense, but accountable in the able to account for sense. And they need support from various areas, most crucially from leadership, to ensure that time, energy and focus are assured. And for the accessibility part, what do we need there? We need to be able to plan appropriately so that it's prioritised accordingly. We need to be able to test and validate what we implement. And that also means we probably need some statements or standards that we can adhere to. And of course, we need education. It's getting messy now, isn't it? So what else do we need? Well, QA needs to be able to validate and test accessibility, and we'll need user researchers and user experience to support this too. We'll need specialists to help provide education. And for pretty much everything that helps developers, these things need to be upheld by our mindset, by the team culture. If we don't have a culture of empathy, compassion, vulnerability and support, then we're swimming against the tide. To have leaders that champion accessibility, they need to have been on their own journey of accessibility. To make time and space for training and awareness, that needs a growth mindset and a culture that supports it. To be held accountable, that requires a culture that supports and elevates others, rather than an attrition-filled blame culture. And now there's arrows everywhere because, of course, making such a clean distinction between things never works that well anyway. And before I forget, it's not just about making your games accessible, as that's just one aspect of a player's experience. There's documentation for compliance, there's accessible communications, whether that's social media, websites, forums, videos, marketing support websites, and. How are we ever going to get to where we want to be with this mountain of things to worry about and focus on? That's a lot to tackle, right? And when presented with the challenge of shifting from where you are now to where you'd like to be, it can feel imperative that you start taking action immediately. And you might be inclined to start taking on responsibility for all of this yourself. But if you already are making games, the chances are that there's a whole host of really talented, super smart people who are responsible for a whole range of different things, who are probably really willing and happy to make the things they're responsible for accessible, but they might not know that they can do that. They might not be aware that they aren't being inclusive. Or they might be aware that they don't know that their leaders will support them. Or they might know that they can and should do it, but don't know how, or have the right support. And the sneaky, sneaky trick here is to decentralize responsibility for accessibility to everyone, not just you. And that starts with shifting mindsets, aligning values, and addressing the culture of your teams to embed accessibility in from the outset. I call this the make Xander's job easier approach. So let's shift this viewpoint from being outcome-focused to intent-focused. Really, we're talking about how and why. Making games, that's about the method, the how, the what we make, and how we make it. And that everyone can play, that's our intent, that's a mindset, that's the why. Why accessibility is important, why we should care, why there's absolutely no good reason why we should exclude people. And of course, these two things can impact each other. As an example, a dynamic service-driven feature toggle system can reduce a cultural fear of taking risks, for example, as features can be toggled off or altered with ease. Or implementing code review processes can engender a more open, collaborative mindset. Autonomy is supported by being able to draw a straight line through values, purpose, and action. If we're advocating for everyone to deliver impact within accessibility, they have to be able to do so with autonomy. And in order to be autonomous, you need to understand the reasons behind what you're doing. Connecting the dots between your values, your shared purpose, and the task you're working on is an enabler, whether at an individual, team, or organisational level. If you simply take a punitive approach to accessibility, the story doesn't end well. Because I said so is never a compelling reason. Behavioural change comes from a change in mindset. And if we're asking people to do something different, your job is infinitely easier if they agree with the reasons why. But they have to understand the reasons why in the first place. The case for accessibility is fundamentally one of human empathy. Do we want to build games that as many people as possible can play? Yes? Good. Here's your answer. Make your games accessible. But often game devs at any level of seniority don't understand that unintentional exclusion is happening all the time, or what they can do about it. So let's talk about the logical progression here. If I introduced a brand new process for you to follow, but I didn't explain why, well, you might do it for a while, but you have no measure for success as you don't know why you're doing it, why it's important. And you'll be constantly checking back with me to see if the thing you're working on is fit for purpose, as you don't really understand why you're doing it in the first place. You need to understand the reason first. Why are we doing this stuff? Then you understand the why and can support that endeavour. That's the mission aspect here, the shared purpose. And in order to understand the reason why, you have to believe in it. You have to share the values of inclusivity, to be motivated by inequality and injustice, and that's the mindset aspect, the culture of a team. Without shared values and attitudes, we're likely to have a differing view on our mission and our purpose, and without knowing the purpose, it's hard to take meaningful action to deliver against that purpose. I believe, maybe naively, that as humans we have a fundamental capacity for empathy, that we're uncomfortable with inequity, and work at our best when we feel that we're making positive changes to the world that we live in. So what does moving from mindset to method, from intent to action look like? How do we get there? Well, first off, I'd suggest evaluating where you and your studio are right now. Is the drive for accessibility coming from leadership, from individual contributors, from both? What allies are there in the business? If it doesn't seem that you have any, well, how could you change that? What resources are at your disposal? Educational, training materials, internal initiatives, centralised teams? What barriers are there? Focus, effort, time, prioritisation, Perspectives on team, stakeholder buy-in? If we consider that moving from zero accessibility to gold star, top tier, VIP accessibility is a journey, not a state, then here's an oversimplified view on that, a linear upward progression. This can be applied to individuals, but can also be a measure of a team or organisation's journey or current state as well. We start with unconscious bias, something we're all capable of and exceptionally likely to have on some level. We could also call this a lack of awareness or unconsciously incompetent, pick your phrasing, but essentially this is someone that doesn't know what they don't know. As that person becomes aware of how exclusionary and inaccessible games can be, that awareness engenders empathy. We become more aware of how things outside our own lived experience and just how much assumption we can make about an individual's abilities. And that in turn builds curiosity. We're keen to build on our learnings, to understand, in order to be able to take action. And at the risk of showing more hugely complicated spider diagrams, in this simplified drawing I haven't shown the iterative, looping nature in practice, where we need feedback loops at various stages. So, how can we take a group of people on this journey? Well, to counteract unconscious bias, let's raise awareness. We can drive visibility within a team, exposing developers to barriers they might not currently be aware of or recognise as a barrier. This could be signal boosting social media posts or articles. It could be liaising with a charity or organisation like Special Effect, RNIB, Wargamer, Can I Play That, Able Gamers, for example, in the many ways they can help to drive awareness. Part of this is also training and education. A ton of it is free online, such as Microsoft's own Accessibility Fundamentals 101 course. Or there's the Able Gamers APX course, Microsoft's Inclusive Design Portal, the Xbox Accessibility Guidelines. There's an absolute ton of stuff out there. Communicating the opportunity space could be helpful in bringing leaders along with you on this journey. The purchasing power of accessibility, the prevalence of unseen need, the breadth of benefits that accessibility provides for all players. And if the opportunity space is the carrot, then compliance is the stick. Compliance with laws and regulations can act as a forcing function, and CVAA is a great example of this, where the opportunity is that you won't end up being sued for being inaccessible. Building empathy. The most effective method I've seen by far is to give people exposure to the challenges of others. Watching a disabled streamer playing a well-known game, inviting a consultant in to playtest your game. In my experience, this is an incredible driver for building empathy and motivating action. As well as this, it helps to normalise accessibility and provide real context to challenges. Understanding the impact of exclusionary experiences for a broad range of players helps to minimise othering. Concepts like accessibility being broader than the cliched stereotypes and being a need that can be situational or temporary really help to normalise and contextualise the challenges that people encounter. Fundamentally, empathy is about being a decent person, and my hope is that with a few nudges, empathy blossoms naturally from awareness. Staying curious. This is a natural extension from awareness and empathy, being curious about the lived experiences of others. This can be quite detailed and granular if applied to a specific issue or problem space. Playtesting your game with a diverse player base is just one way of doing this, but other methods like engaging with consultants, heuristic reviews with subject matter experts, there's no one-size-fits-all approach. Inclusive design methodologies are a great way to leverage empathy into action via curiosity, a framework for designing in inclusive ways. Microsoft has some great resources on this. And on that note, training and learning opportunities, whether that's individual learning paths for specific disciplines or a broad team-wide levelling up of understanding. Also, feed curiosity in accessibility solutions where it tends to naturally sit anyway in the dev life cycle. At the quick and dirty phase of prototyping, in game jams, skunkworks sprints, seed these areas with accessibility challenges and open questions, and feed the curious mind of a team with some delicious problems for them to solve. And a healthy dose of introspection is vital too, understanding where in the delivery pipeline is best for different tasks or milestones, and looking at your team's values and seeing where they might need realignment. So there's loads of ways to inspire action, whether through advocate programs like champs groups, special interest groups, or awareness-raising events. Bringing key supporting disciplines such as UI, audio and community on board. Applying standards and referencing guidelines, etc. The most fundamental aspect in my perspective, however, is to decentralize or distribute the responsibility for implementation. Not only does this mean that accessibility is embedded, it minimizes operational risk, levels up existing development teams, normalizes accessibility, and it also makes for a much stronger end result, as the people who specialize in that field are best placed to implement the changes necessary to support accessibility. And of course, any action you take in your end product needs feedback loops. QA need to know what to raise as issues, and it helps to have accessibility as a core part of milestone reviews. It's also worth mentioning, Signal boosts your successes here, both within the team and for the visibility of leadership. Great reviews? Share them. Happy players enjoying a feature that was previously unavailable to them? Let the development team know. It feels good to do good. So to summarise, the best work is done by people who care. They won't half-arse it. If people don't care, understand why. Is it external pressures like time, effort, focus? Distribute responsibility for accessibility to those who have the greatest chance of impacting the end product. That's usually the people responsible for their own specialist areas. And leadership. It's so helpful to have leaders on board. I can't stress this enough. If you're not in that situation, well, there's probably a whole other talk about how to shift the needle, but I can't speak from experience there. We're really fortunate at Rare. Our studio head, Craig Duncan, is a fantastic advocate for accessibility and inclusion and makes space, time and energy to support our work. And he, in turn, is supported by people like Matt Booty, Phil Spencer and Satya. To have a direct line of support right the way through an organisation is just incredible. And make accessibility accessible. Democratise resources, advocate for accessibility, support the efforts of others, and above all, aim to understand opposing perspectives and target the root cause of disconnect between differences of opinion. It can feel so imperative and natural to rail against unfairness, but in your eagerness to do good, you can entrench others in their positions. Look to Ian Hamilton's zen-like focus and calm in addressing the discourse on Twitter for a saint-like example of this. And finally, shift mindsets before rushing into methodology. You might not get huge results quickly, but you'll get to a stronger place eventually. Thank you.